Tonight, with a partial government shutdown just days away,
We gotta figure out how we're gonna keep funding the government.
the border takes top priority for the president. How immigration is playing into the fight to keep the federal government open for business. Plus, an Alabama court ruling sparks a nationwide debate.
What sort of rights we're going to have over the embryos that we create.
The growing national conversation about embryos and abortion. And
they need practical counsel, and they're crying out for it.
how some are fighting religious persecution in the United States. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Days until a partial government shutdown. New polling shows Americans are losing faith in their lawmakers. Good evening from the nation's capital here in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, this Friday, government funding for some programs could come to a halt. Up against the ticking clock, congressional leaders made their way from the U.S. Capitol to the White House for talks with President Biden. Today's meeting comes at a time of tough criticism of the work taking place on Capitol Hill. A new Gallup poll shows only 12% of Americans approve of how Congress is handling its job, the lowest rating in nearly a decade. And at the Oval Office today, President Biden emphasized the importance of working across the aisle for the sake of the American people.
We gotta figure out how we're gonna keep funding the government, which is an important problem, an important solution we need to find. I think that it's Congress's responsibility to fund the government. We got to get about doing a shutdown would damage the economy significantly, and I think we all agree to that, and we need bipartisan solutions.
Democratic leadership called today's talks productive, but the question remains whether an agreement can be made ahead of Friday's first shutdown deadline. Well, border security discussions are central to avoiding a shutdown, and the U.S. southern border will be front and center later this week, with both the current and former president set to make dueling trips. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka joins us now with more on the political battle lines in the immigration debate. Matt.
Well, John, both President Biden and former President Donald Trump will be at border towns in Texas on Thursday, about 300 miles apart. And fixing the southern border is at the center of discussions between lawmakers and the president while they try to avoid another government shutdown. The top 4 Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate met with the president to hash out differences over a looming government shutdown. A partial shutdown hitting agriculture, energy, veterans affairs, transportation, and housing and urban development could happen Friday, with the remaining departments impacted next week. The high-level meetings also focused on foreign aid, including money for Ukraine and Israel, as well as the southern border.
We must take care of America's needs first. When you talk about America's needs, you have to talk first about our open border.
A bipartisan Senate border bill collapsed after the House Speaker made it clear he would not support the bill in his chamber.
We all agree that we have a broken immigration system and there is a need to address the challenges at the border in a thoughtful, bipartisan way.
Illegal immigration has already become a central theme of the 2024 election. Biden will make a rare southern border visit this week on the same day former President Donald Trump will be at a different border town.
You look outside and you see all of the horror. You see millions and millions of people coming across the border illegally.
Prolonged government shutdown could further stall any border action in Congress.
The first priority of the country is our border and making sure it's secure. I believe the president can take executive authority right now today to change that. And I told him that again today in person, as I've said to him many times, publicly and privately over the last several weeks. It's time for action. It is a catastrophe, and it must stop.
Could you do border just by administrative action? I think Biden won that argument because he said you can't do it, we all said, without personnel. And you need legislation for personnel. And even the Republicans in the budget asked for more money for personnel at the border.
Now, to further emphasize just how important of an issue the southern border is in the country right now, a new Gallup poll released shows a majority of Americans say immigration is the top problem the country is facing. It's the first time immigration topped the list since 2019. John?
All right, CBN's Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka. Thank you, Matt. Well, David Beer is the Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute, and he joins us now. David, welcome to you. So Matt just mentioned the dueling border visits Thursday between President Biden and former President Trump. David, what do you think we can expect to see, and how will the two candidate stops be different?
Look, you're going to see President Biden highlight the fact that he has endorsed bipartisan legislation to massively increase funding for Border Patrol, hire more agents, detain more immigrants, and deport more immigrants, and that the House of Representatives shot that proposal down. Republicans blocked it in the Senate, and that's really going to be his pitch. I put something out there. They didn't want it. They want to continue the status quo. On the other side of things, you're going to have Trump highlighting the chaos that's happening at the border and say, you know, Biden ruined everything when he came into office and changed my policies. And, you know, that's really going to be the narrative that's going to be coming from both sides as they kind of hash out the politics of the issue, even if the policy isn't changing.
So a lot of finger pointing there, but when you look at the border at its current state of play, David, what do you see as the biggest issue? Is it the record number of illegal entries? Is it the broken asylum system? And what should be the biggest priority right now for lawmakers?
Look, we have to do something about the fact that you have so many people crossing the border illegally. And I mean, that's the most important issue. I mean, the fact that people come in illegally, then they're released by Border Patrol. They have no right to work in this country, so there's no way for them to support themselves. They don't know if they're going to be released or not. So then, you know, they're on a government bus to New York City, and then they're in government housing. I mean, these are the problems with illegal immigration. And really the best way to address that is through changes to the legal immigration system that encourages people stay in your home country, apply to come legally. We've seen some of that play out with this administration trying to do some things. But if it's not Congress going to act, I mean, you heard the Speaker of the House talking about how the White House needs to take executive action. You're the one who makes the laws, make some laws, and really force the administration to do things that you think are going to encourage legal immigration and discourage illegal immigration.
Just a few seconds left here, but with the impasse with Republicans and Democrats on any new immigration reform, we've heard in response President Biden threatened to shut down the border. In reality, David, what kind of action can he actually take to ease the humanitarian chaos?
I mean, what he's talking about is fantasy land. I mean, there's no authority out there that just says no one can cross the border illegally anymore. You need personnel to implement any policy. You need resources, places to detain people. We had Title 42 in effect for 3 years. Anyone who crossed the border was entitled to no process whatsoever. It didn't work when you don't have the resources to enforce that type of policy.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there. David Beer of the Cato Institute, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Well, turning now to the tensions in the Middle East, President Biden says a hostage deal and ceasefire could come by next week, although Hamas says that estimate is premature. As talks between the two sides continue, Israel is preparing for an assault in the southern Gazan city of Rafah.
This is considered to be the final Hamas stronghold. Israel says it is essential to carry out that operation to defeat Hamas.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that once combat comes to Rafah, Israel's war with Hamas will end in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, in the north, Hezbollah fired dozens of rockets into the Jewish state. Israel's defense minister says in response, it will increase its firepower against the Iranian-backed terror group.
We'll continue the fire, and we'll do so independently from the south until we achieve our goals. The goal is simple, to withdraw Hezbollah to where it should be, either via an agreement or we will do it by force.
Gallant says it will continue defending itself on its northern border with Lebanon, regardless of the situation in Gaza. Well, tourism in Israel has slowed due to the war, but some Christians aren't being deterred. They say they want to support both the Jewish state and its people. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story from Jerusalem.
Scott Phillips leads Passages, a Christian organization that connects students with Israel to deepen their faith and build bridges.
It's so important to be in Israel right now because Christians are called for such a time as this to stand with Israel and the Jewish community worldwide.
On this visit, Phillips felt compelled to speak out about the alarming rise in U.S. anti-Semitism.
During the Holocaust, not enough Christians spoke up, and so it's important that we build a movement of young Christians in the United States of America who are rooted in their biblical faith, are leading with courage at home, and are standing with Israel and the Jewish people.
The delegation met with Yami and Naomi Weiser, whose son, Staff Sergeant Rory Weiser, was killed on October 7th while saving 12 of his fellow soldiers on the Erez Crossing base. They also visited 2 Gaza border communities and the site of the Nova Music Festival, ravaged by Hamas on October 7th.
When we went down south to the communities of Netiv Asura and Kfar Aza, and also the site of the Nova Music Festival, and to see all of the burned cars, there's hardly any words to put to it. The folks in our group really are just eager to be able to go back and tell the story of what they've seen, to do whatever they can in their communities, their spheres of influence all over the United States, to be able to tell the story and stand with Israel.
Passages donated $250,000 each to the communities of Netiv HaAsara and Kfar Aza to provide psychological counseling and support young people affected by the horrors of that day.
Our group, those who have come over here to Israel with us during this time, are taking a message back that this actually happened. October 7th, the horrible tragedies of that day actually did happen, and that they saw it with their own eyes. They're going to be able to take back a message of support for Israel and support for the Jewish community back at home.
Phillips believes a spiritual blindness is causing people to deny the tragic events.
Obviously, we've seen the destruction. We've heard the stories of these communities and these people who have lost friends and family. And so we have to stand for the truth. We have to call what is good, good, and what is evil, evil. And there's a real distinction now, and we have to stand firm on that.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. Controversy over when life begins. Next on Faith Nation, how IVF and abortion are coming to a head in Alabama, and the national impact. Welcome back. Frozen embryos are people. That recent ruling from Alabama's Supreme Court has set off a national conversation about when life begins, causing some clinics in the state to halt in vitro fertilization treatments, fearing repercussions if something goes wrong. Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth is an IVF parent herself on Capitol Hill today. She highlighted the potential fallout facing both medical providers and those hoping to become parents.
IVF providers around the state and Alabama have already paused treatment out of fear that their doctors and patients could be criminally punished. And now that the first domino has fallen, it may only be a matter of time before more hospitals make the same call, before more courts issue similar rulings putting more women at risk.
The issue is raising questions, especially among Republican lawmakers, many of which have signed the Life at Conception Act, which critics say is at odds with providing protection for IVF. Now, some in the GOP are making it a point to speak out in support of the treatment, even becoming an issue on the 2024 campaign trail.
You've been seeing Alabama. It's been a big story, like the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republican, conservatives, Christians, and pro-life Americans. I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious little beautiful baby.
And for more on this, let's bring in Penny Nance, President and CEO of Concerned Women for America. Penny, it's always great to see you. So conservatives who support measures aimed at protecting life celebrated in the wake of the Dobbs decision back in 2022. Now you're seeing mixed reaction, with some distancing themselves from Alabama's IVF ruling. You've said conservatives must provide bold, steady leadership on life. Penny, why has this ruling seemed to divide those who consider themselves pro-life?
Well, I think it's a new question for conservatives. You know, I think there's also, Christians have different opinions on IVF, but you know, IVF is, I'm sorry, here to stay. And it's about a $39 billion industry and per year, and it's not going anywhere. But what we need to actually talk about is ethical IVF. Other Western countries have much more regulation rules, countries like Australia, that require, if you're going to do IVF, you can't create a whole bunch of embryos and then destroy the ones that you don't want. That is not ethical, and that is not pro-life. If you're willing to do IVF and you feel like the Lord has led you there for your family, you need to be willing, and doctors need to be protective of those little embryos that we create. So ethical IVF is an idea that is not new, but it's something that we need to adopt. The industry is, you know, proliferating everywhere and around this country. In the very beginning, there was a couple who were written about extensively that gave birth to septuplets. That was 7. And the reason she had 7 children, her name was Bobby, is because that when she understood IVF and she understood she had created live embryos, that she wasn't willing to destroy any of them. And the doctors wanted to do selective reduction, which was an abortion of any number of her children. And she said, these are my children. Which of them should I destroy? And she didn't. And she gave birth to all 7 children. And now those are probably in their 20s now. We have come a long way from that. We actually know and understand and can discern better what that looks like. But I just really believe that doctors and parents need to work together and only create the embryos that they're willing to give birth to.
Penny, President Biden's Health and Human Services Secretary traveled to Alabama today. He said we wouldn't have the IVF ruling in Alabama without the Dobbs decision. You say Democrats are using scare tactics and false messaging. If that's true, it's been effective at the ballot box, as we've seen. How do you turn the tides on the messaging?
Well, the very same that we've had this discussion today. It was an honest discussion with education behind it. You know, Alabama is its own state. They get to set the rules for their state. They will have that discussion. But Alabama's not setting the rules for California. And so part of what the overturn of Roe did was allowed us to work it out within our own states, what we want the rules to be. And so we can't allow the left to pretend that they have the ability, there's a super ability to impose Alabama's beliefs on California. That's just not the case. Again, there's a lot of education that needs to happen around all of these issues, John, but we're really grateful to President Trump for 3 Supreme Court justices that finally put us in a position where we can even have this discussion, because the heavy hand of the judiciary isn't setting the law for the entire country.
Penny Nance with Concerned Women for America, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Protecting the right to practice your religion here at home. The fight for religious freedom is taking place in the land of the free when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Newly released body cam footage shows the shocking moment a shooting took place inside Pastor Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Texas. The video released by Houston Police Monday shows Genesee Moreno entering the church with her son. In her hands, an AR-style rifle, which she quickly starts firing, prompting church security to shoot back. The shooter was killed by security. Well, lawsuits, vandalism, and smear campaigns, it might sound like a crime show, but threats like these are what some faith-based groups face every day. Now religious freedom advocates are addressing the uptick. CBN's Heather Sells reports on the growing number of resources.
So often, Christians and other people of faith feel really besieged right now.
Religious Freedom Institute President Eric Patterson and other advocates no longer just concentrate on persecution overseas. That is because of growing threats against all faiths here at home.
They feel besieged by neo-Marxism, by wokeism, by the sexual orientation and gender ideologies that seem to be pressing a new view that nothing is real, there's no male, there's no female.
Attacks include legal fights, hostile legislation, workplace backlash, and vandalism. The Religious Freedom Institute reports criminals attacked more than 60 pro-life organizations following the Supreme Court's decision that ended Roe v. Wade. It also points to attacks against Catholics and a dramatic spike in U.S. anti-Semitism since the October 7th Hamas massacre. adding to this perfect storm an aggressive cancel culture and expanding government power.
Here's the basic model. It is using the power of the state, whether in an unelected Human Rights Commission, as they're so-called in Colorado, or using new interpretations of federal code, as we've seen with Title IX.
At the heart of many attacks, a belief that expression of faith should be limited.
What you'll often hear is, oh, it's okay for you to worship. There's freedom to worship, which means you can do that behind closed doors at home, as long as you don't offend me.
To protect all people of faith outside of their homes, religious freedom advocates have begun to encourage the proactive use of resources, such as media guides and legal kits.
They need practical counsel, and they're crying out for it.
Attorney Bernadette Broyles, president of the Child and Parental Rights Campaign, helps pastors and faith-based leaders seeking ministry and legal help for a wide range of situations. Many revolve around gender. Her group's new Church Transgender Guide offers ministries advice, including a close look at governing documents.
It is far better to embrace a biblical worldview and to document that and to be unapologetic about that. That is far more protective legally in the long run.
In this political season, Patterson says look for candidates who argue for protection of faith and conscience for all. And he recommends leaning on the ways of Christ and offering hope to others.
This is really a time for engaging love with our neighbors, inviting people over for dinner, getting to know them, listening, and just being loving about our faith and our perspective at this time.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
And finally tonight, man's best friend came through for her owner after a car crash that left the two disoriented. The pair were cruising to the park with the windows down, and that's when they were suddenly hit by another car. The 3-year-old dog jumped into action, hopping out of the car window, running in search of help. She went straight to a doggy daycare that she attends, getting the attention of the workers there. The dog's owner says she's thankful for the pup's quick thinking and help. That is both a heroic and a very, very smart and cute dog, I should say. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow. Good night.